Special today. I have Dr. Tina Payne Bryson, who we have done a podcast together called Baby in the House. We were just talking about that before we started rolling. She recently wrote this book called The Bottom Line for Baby, and it goes through, and I love it because it's short chapters that are alphabetically organized, like all the different baby questions that you could come up with. And so I wanted to have her on today to talk about some parenting questions. I have a text line that people can text me questions, and I get questions all the time. And I try and do lives as often as I can to answer those questions. And I thought it'd be fun to have Tina on to kind of talk through and help me get through some of these questions because she has such expertise, and she just wrote this baby bottom line for baby book, all of these things. I thought it would be fun to have her on. And so we're just going to jump right into the questions. And if you have a question, you can just comment below and we'll either answer it live today right now or get up to it next time. And maybe since, we won't probably get to all the questions, it'll be a good excuse for me to bug Tina to do another one of these. Or you can text me 402-256-0768 and we'll get those questions answered either today or on the next question and answer session. So, Tina, it's earlier in the day there. What are you drinking right now?
Okay, I don't want to admit this to you because you're a doctor. And if my best friend hears this,
oh, no.
I will not hear the end of it. A giant glass. I mean, I use giant glasses and I always because I love big things of ice water. This right now is Diet Coke, which I
that's
know
okay. I have
bad for me. But.
Well, it's after lunchtime here and I have a couple of these in my trash can. So I can't say that like it's the worst thing in the world. So
I don't want my kids to drink it though. It probably means I shouldn't drink it. I should lead by better example. But just know I've been drinking water all morning. I just finished a workout. And I knew I wanted to have a little more pep in my step to talk to you. So I thought I'd caffeinate a little bit before lunch.
Awesome. Well, I'm having my afternoon coffee too. So we're both caffeinating up.
All right.
Okay.
Good.
So now we're ready. So here's first question, and hopefully you can read it. Hello, are you able to do a video on teeth brushing for 1-year-olds, young toddlers? It's a battle, and how can we get them to do it? So what do you tell parents, and it could be about teeth brushing, it can be about things along those lines, when it comes to stuff that needs to be done but that we don't typically love doing?
Yeah, so the best way to get cooperation from young children is play and silly based kinds of approaches. I tell parents this, and I will have parents who say, look, I don't want to put on an effing puppet show just to get my kid to put her shoes on. I just don't want to do it. But the truth is we spend so much more energy in the battle that could be prevented if we're just a little bit sillier. So here are some, off the top of my head, some suggestions, stuff I tried with my kids for getting in the car seat, putting shoes on, brushing teeth. Specific to brushing teeth, have her or him brush your teeth. And while they brush your teeth, you're brushing their teeth, right? And you can even make it competitive. Can we beat our time? But by that meaning, can we go longer than we did last time, not shorter?
Gotcha.
So you can do that. Also, you can, if they have a favorite character, if you're looking for, you'd be like, I'm going to look for Elmo in there. Let me see. And as you're brushing, I don't see Elmo. Do you think Elmo's in there? So you're kind of being silly about that. Using an accent or trying to imitate their favorite character. Sometimes I'd pull out the Mary Poppins British accent to try to get them, like I would order them around with pretending I was Mary Poppins. But, in terms of like car seats, one of the suggestions or one of the things I did that worked a lot was reverse psychology with a silliness, right? I was, please don't get in your car seat today because my imaginary friend Herman is in there. And so if you sit in your car seat, you're going to sit on Herman and he's going to get really weird and start getting upset. And then I have to do that weird dance to calm him down. They can't wait to get into their car seat. So just if we're using silliness, play, that kind of thing, or they can be brushing the teeth of a doll or a stuffed animal while you're helping brush their teeth. So just anything that's creative, silly, playful. What about you? Have you had that battle and what do you do?
We have had that battle, and sometimes it ranges between like they either love brushing their teeth or they hate brushing their teeth. One time it was Christmas a couple of years ago, and we're all at our in-laws, and I see Dorothy, who was then probably like 18 months, 2 years, something like that. She's carrying a toothbrush around and brushing her teeth, and I was like, well, where could that toothbrush have come from? Because certainly she didn't climb like into their medicine cabinet and get their toothbrushes at my in-laws' house, and traced it back. And this was the toothbrush from under the sink that they used to clean the toilets and everything like that. And so that was like our fun toothbrushing memory, was like, how do we move forward from that? And who is going to have to do bedtime kisses tonight after that was in her mouth? But I agree completely with all of that advice. Like, if you can, you don't want to put on a puppet show, but at the same time, if you can get them on board, then it will take a lot less time and cause a lot less stress. I like the idea of letting them brush the teeth of the stuffed animals and things like that. Carrying a toothbrush around a bit, I think, is fine, and just getting in the habit of that. Honestly, our kids brush their teeth while we brush our teeth for the most part, so they will try and find a toothbrush if they see us brushing our teeth. And so, yeah, that's my advice for that too. I think just making it silly. And
they can even chew on a toothbrush a little bit while you're reading stories to them, and I know it's ideal to brush their teeth after the last meal or drink that isn't water for the day. But some days, if you feel like, look, tonight is going to be we're going to have major battles tonight, I can see it coming, do it before dinner if you have to, and then have them take a drink of water and rinse your mouth out. Just, we don't have to be rigid about it being always, the same thing. And we just got to be flexible when they're that young.
Well, I think that's part of it too, is the control. Like, you're trying to get them to do something on your timetable when maybe they're not game for that. And if they see you, and last night we had to kind of like hold them down or do a headlock to get them to brush their teeth, then that will cause a lot of resistance. And so if instead we can kind of partner with them and realize that the perfect is the enemy of the good, and brushing their teeth before dinner, if it's more tolerable and gets the teeth brushed at least, is better than a fight and all of those things. So
and
like
one more idea is, even 1-year-olds, it's really fun for them to get to have a say in things. So let them pick out the toothbrush, right?
Right.
And one thing that's really helpful is to have 2 or 3 options. So then it's not like you have to brush your teeth, but like, which toothbrush are you going to pick tonight? Which one's your favorite one today, right? So then they feel like they're having a choice. So those are just some, you spend an extra $1.79, but that's worth not having the battles, so that's another idea.
That is good advice. Give them control back so that they can have some control, and then you can have the control when you need it. And I think that applies to everything.
It's not worth the battle. I saw somebody was posting different meltdowns their kids were having about different things. And one of them was that the kid was having a total tantrum because her mom wouldn't let her fall asleep with a half-eaten apple. And I thought, you know what? Who cares? Let her fall asleep. I mean, unless there's a safety choking issue or something like that, sometimes kids want to do really, I want to sleep with a box of Band-Aids. Well, as long as they're safe and they're not going to eat them and they're not choking hazards, that is not, the place to like make your stand. Do not hang your cross on some of the issues that we get really rigid about. They're not worth the battle.
I agree completely. And I think that is something that parents often struggle with, is they have to do everything that I say in the order that I say it. But if they don't, then they're walking all over me, or I'm going to spoil them by catering to their demands for, a box of Band-Aids in their bed at night or something like that. And I just don't see that. I see that kids are much more willing to do what we need them to do if we're willing to play ball and realize that maybe we have to negotiate, or things don't have to go perfectly, but we can try and set the mood, but then, allow them a little leeway within there.
Absolutely. We don't have to be insecure about our control. Things happen all the time where we are in control. They have so little control truly over the way their world works. And it's almost like if we're really rigid and saying, I'm in charge and you have to do everything I say in the order I say it and the way I say it. That actually is more of a what we would call like an authoritarian type of parenting style instead of an authoritative one. And the outcomes for that are just not as good. Kids actually are not better behaved. They're not less spoiled. They actually get better at hiding their bad behavior. And they know that they can't come to you because you're the kind of person who's really rigid and going to be really judgmental and punitive about the missteps that they have. So it's actually better for our kids in terms of internalizing boundaries and being responsible if we're not so rigid and demanding about being in control.
great. I mean, this has been like the most explosion of great parenting information, all about just getting how to get a toothbrush or a kid to brush their teeth. I love it. This is like exactly what I was hoping for. And by the way, as we move on to the next question, I will tell you that I did not share these questions in advance with Tina. So this is all on the spot on her. I know what the questions are. She does not. And so extra props to you. And this one's really long, but I will just sum it up for you, which is to say that we have an 18-month-old who's a little bit super clingy. And how do we get her to do more independent play I think this mom is expecting number 2, but it's essentially the question is, how do we encourage independent play and not always being at mom or dad's side at all times?
Yeah, I mean, every kid is born with a different temperament. And some kids are born really comfortable being alone, doing things on their own, and they're really creative at entertaining themselves. And other kids are the absolute opposite. And I have 3 boys, and I have one that it falls into each of those categories. And often it's that firstborn that actually is not as good at entertaining themselves, playing by themselves, and who become really connected to us. This is a good thing that they want to be with us. The main purpose of attachment, the main foundation of it for mammals, is for them to be close to us so that we can protect them from harm and ensure their survival. But it's also to regulate their emotional states. So if they get scared, they look at you and you give them some assurance and they know they're okay. And also to regulate their physiological states. So if they're wet, we fix it. If they're cold, we fix it. If they get scared and their heart beats really fast and we pull them close to us, their heartbeat returns to normal rhythm. So really, this is the purpose. It sounds like your child is beautifully attached to you. So that's a good thing. It's an almost 18-month-old that we're talking about here. So it's really developmentally appropriate that your child wants to be with you. That's a good thing. In terms of how we kind of expand our child's window of tolerance for not being with us every second or playing on their own, we can do a couple of things. One thing that was really helpful for my kid, and this happened a little bit later than 18 months, this was closer to 2. But you can absolutely do this with a 12-month-old, even a 12-month-old. So for sure in that 18-month category, is to begin to kind of set up a world for them. So what I mean by that is, so my son would never play on his own, and I needed just 5 minutes. I just needed a 5-minute break.
Right.
And just as a quick aside, I know that the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no screen time at all, except for interacting maybe with grandparents over, a face-to-face kind of thing. But I feel like with an 18-month-old, I figured a 20-minute episode of something lovely and educational that I put on for him was much less damaging than me being really frustrated and impatient and dysregulated myself. So keep in mind, so just use it, with your best judgment. But so what I would do is I would set up a couple of toys. Like I would set up a plastic castle, and I would tie a rope to the top of the castle, and I would tie a rope to a doorknob, and I would hang a couple action figures on the rope. And then I would kind of like step away, and I might say something like, the guy's trying to get from the door all the way to the castle. Do you think he can make it? And I would kind of step back, and my kid could then, I've sort of like made a world for him. You can put out a blue towel or blanket, and this is an ocean, and you got to try and get your guy across. So just using a little bit of imagination to kind of set the stage. Usually they get really excited and then can get engaged with their own imaginative play, even just for a few minutes. And as you do that, and as development unfolds, your kid will have more capacity to do that. It's okay also, I want to say, I've had those experiences and talked to parents where your kid wants you every second. Keep in mind that kids will switch gears in terms of preference. Your 18-month-old may prefer you right now, but if you're co-parenting and living with your child's other parent, at some point that child might prefer that other parent and reject you. And that's kind of sad, but also a nice relief at times. But I want to say too that, there's a huge difference in a child being left alone for a long period of time crying and a child who is upset because you're taking a shower and being held in someone else's loving arms that's comforting them. So it's actually not bad for your kid to, if you take a shower or you go want to take a walk or have a minute to yourself and someone else is watching your kid, whether that's a co-parent or a babysitter or family member, whatever. If your kid is upset and crying and someone's there comforting them and taking care of them, that is actually a resilience building experience for your child. Sure. Because it's a stress, and kids need to have moments of stress with support and care so they realize that they can get through it. So don't feel like you have to be on it every single second. You just can't.
Totally agree. And I think that everything you said there, especially that it's okay if they're upset and tended to because you had to step away to take a shower or run an errand or just have 5 minutes, to go to the bathroom by yourself or something like that. Yeah. That is totally fine. And I will echo what you said too, which was about setting up a little world for them so that they have some things that they can do. And then what we typically do is kind of just move slowly away from them while they're playing, give some affirmation that, wow, you're playing really nicely. Oh my gosh, look what you're doing there. Step back a little bit further. And then, as they play on their own, checking in from time to time, you don't have to worry that, like, if you check in, they're just going to run back to your ankle and be at your ankle the rest of the day. If you can kind of affirm them or check in or, narrate what you see them doing, that's ways to keep that behavior going. And then you can kind of congratulate them on playing by themselves and wasn't that neat, and talk that up a little bit more as a way to kind of build that affirmation that independent play is okay. So I think that that's all such good advice, but it can be difficult when it feels like you have to be on all day, you have to curate every moment, and it all has to be educational, and you always have to be cutting and gluing or practicing flashcards or doing these things that build up their development. Well, you don't have to do all that. If you can put out pots and pans for them and tolerate the noise, or if you can put some simple toys on the ground that don't need batteries and don't have buttons and just allow them to experience their world and interact with that and be curious about their world, then they will do just fine, and that will be a chance for you to sit back, step back, and do the stuff that you need to do.
Yeah, a 12 to 18-month-old, sometimes just opening the cabinet that has your plastic Tupperware and plastic glasses in and just leaving the cabinet open. Or like you said, pots and pans with a tiny little bit of water in it with some spoons, that kind of thing can be really helpful. The other thing I would say about this is I hear in this question some worry. It says specifically, I worry about her ability to entertain herself and do things independently. And I want to tell you, you don't have to worry about that. You can totally cross that worry off your list. Your 18-month-old is so young, and the dependence on you is appropriate. And you really just don't have to have any concerns. As development unfolds, your child will learn how to do all of those things. And so there's nothing you need to nip in the bud or nothing you need to do or change, except for just protecting your own self-care. That may be something you need to change. But in terms of your child's right on target. You really don't need to worry or change anything.
Love it. Such a good answer. Okay. The next question. Oh, I snuck this one in. Somebody asked this one. Which book do you recommend from Dr. Tina Payne Bryson? Or she wrote Dr. Tina Payson, but we know who we assume we know who you're talking about. Yeah. On discipline for 18 months plus. So I can see your books up behind you, but I guess I would say there you go.
Discipline.
The No Drama Discipline and the Yes Brain would be two really good ones, I think. Is that what you would say, or what do you think?
I would say I would start with No Drama Discipline, and then I'd probably go to the Whole Brain Child before I would go to the Yes Brain. The other thing I would say, Bottom Line for Baby has a long entry on discipline, specifically for those first couple of years. So that would be another place. Two other people that I really love for the, toddler years in terms of a really respectful, relational, building emotional regulation kind of stuff is Laura Markham. And that's her last name is Markham, lauramarkham.com. She wrote that book, Happy Parents, Peaceful Siblings. I can never get the title right, but she's got one on siblings and then one on just parenting. And both of them are lovely. She even gives specific scripts for how to walk kids through siblings stuff. But her website's full of really great stuff around toddlers. And the other, I really love Janet Lansbury's work. She has a podcast called Unruffled. And she's got some really lovely books about the toddler years and really rethinking our role as discipline. I'll just quickly say my approach is the goal is to raise children who become self-disciplined. And what that means is our kids need a lot of teaching and skill building. So every opportunity for discipline is really supposed to be an opportunity for teaching so that our kids learn something that they can do better the next time as development unfolds. So it's really thinking about discipline as letting development unfold just as the brain matures, and using those discipline moments as teaching opportunities. If we just rethink our role as disciplinarians as teachers, as opposed to someone who has to come up with a punishment or someone who has to distract our kids, really it's like, what is my kid's behavior communicating about what skills they need to learn, right? So an 18-month-old might get really frustrated and bite you. That behavior is communicating, I don't have a good way to put the emotional brakes on when I get really frustrated. So what you're going to be doing is know, first of all, as they develop just naturally, they're going to be able to learn how to do that without you doing anything. That's just a brain maturation thing. And secondly, you just start giving them some emotional vocabulary. You were frustrated. Biting hurts. You can't bite. So you address the behavior, you address the feeling. And then at 18 months old, I would move the heck on. I would say, biting hurts, no biting. You were feeling frustrated. I will help you. And then I think I hear a bird outside. Let's go see. And that way you're not giving more attention to the misbehavior. You're just waiting for development to unfold. As they get older, moving into 2.5, 3, you can start giving an alternative. You address the behavior, you address the feeling, and then you can add this third part where you say, when you get frustrated, you can ask mommy for help. So you give them an alternative for when they feel that way. So, when you help them understand the feeling, set the boundary on the behavior, and move on, you're helping them learn how to do that in a more internal process.
That is such a good explanation and deep dive into kind of the philosophies of the people, yourself and the people that you described there. I was looking back on my shelf because I have Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids on my bookshelf back there.
Yeah.
Those are great resources too, and I 100% agree with you. I think a lot of times parents come in and they ask me, how do we get them to stop doing blank? Timeout doesn't work. These specific punishments that I've come out with don't work anymore. What can I do now? Give me some more punishment options because I'm running low on punishments. And I say the exact same thing to parents all day long. It's not about what happened. It's about what we can do next time we're facing that situation. So if we can say, hey, I know, and I'll take an example from our house this morning. My son was frustrated and he was putting the dishes away, which is great, but he threw one of the dishes because Dorothy was in his way, and it spilled our little salt pig thing all over the counter. It's like, next time, what could you do instead of making a big mess? And then can we just move on from that, and can you clean up the salt, and we go on with our day? We don't have to do a punishment. We don't have to do all these timeouts or all of the, taking away privileges and amping things up. It's just like, hey, next time somebody's in the way, do you think that you could just set that on the counter instead of throwing it? Great. Let's try and do that next time.
Just going one step deeper, one of the things we argue about, and we argue in No Drama Discipline, is based on a bunch of science that really shows us that, if we want our children to learn and internalize, we can't distract them by overreacting ourselves. And that oftentimes when we get overreactive, we yell, or we have a big response, or punishments can be counterproductive. They get in the way actually of teaching and learning, because if you had sent your kid to his room or taken away a privilege, he would have been spending a lot of attentional resources thinking about how mean you are to do that to him, and it was Dorothy's fault in the first place. And he actually would not be thinking about his own role and what he did and what he should do next time. And so it's actually counterproductive. It's the opposite of what we should be doing. Instead, having that more reflective dialogue where we empathize with the feelings, like you got really frustrated. That was frustrating when she was in her way. It's not okay to throw things, and you saw what happened. So how can you make things right? Okay, good. We can clean up. And what can you do next time? That's perfect. It really is about skill building and teaching as development unfolds. And, I remember my sister, who's a lovely parent, texted me one time when her baby was about 9 months old, and she's like, we're teaching them all of these things, but, I don't know when we start disciplining. And I was like, those aren't separate things. When we teach our kids, like, that oven's hot, we can't touch. That is discipline. We are teaching from those early months. And, I think we spend also a lot of cognitive and emotional energy ourselves trying to figure out what to do, what to say, what punishment to give. And actually, we don't need to spend so much mental load. Just try to help your kid, understand what happened, what they can do next time, how they can make things right or apologize if need be. and move on.
Right. Because I feel like earlier in our parenting, it was always like, well, what punishment would fit the crime? Or how can I make this a logical or natural consequence? Well, he threw a ladle and spilled salt. So what's the logical consequence? And you're spending all this mental energy trying to figure out like what would be the logical consequence of that. I don't know. No ladle, no salt on your food, or I can't even think of a good consequence.
Right.
So instead of focusing so much on like I have to have a punishment on hand at all times for the next bad behavior, it's like how can I teach them and move forward? Great answer. Okay, the next question is, do breastfed babies need to start drinking more ounces per bottle as they get older? Also, should they go up in nipple size or stay at level 1? So I think you talk a lot and I'll plug again while we're talking here, the bottom line for baby, and tell you that if you have a question right now, drop it in the chat below or send a text 402-256-0768. We're getting through the questions, and if we don't get to yours today, we will definitely, hopefully, do another one of these soon so that we can keep going through questions. But what do you think, or what experience do you have, or from the book, anything specific to share in terms of eating, bottle, breastfeeding, all of those sorts of things in terms of as they developmentally progress?
I would defer this question to the pediatrician in the room here in terms of how they should be getting and all of that. One thing I'll say is that, there's a lot of worry about nipple confusion, and actually that's really unfounded worry. There's a lot of science behind that actually. And they say, if you can avoid using additional nipples, whether they be bottle or pacifier in the first 2 weeks, that might be helpful, but it's not even necessary. If your baby is screaming their little head off as a newborn and a pacifier is really soothing, you really can not worry about nipple confusion. So I don't know if that plays into the nipple size, but what would you say about how much food they're getting and nipple size? What would you say about that, Doc?
So for in most babies, I think, we see them go through this, and I try to avoid being like, you have to get this many ounces in, because parents get really fixated on the check boxes of 24 ounces or 16 ounces or 30 ounces or whatever, and then they get hyper focused on that. And I really think that baby, as long as baby is growing and thriving well, he will tell you when he needs more, which means then, if he's going for shorter periods of time between feedings, then it's probably a good time to go up on the amount or frequency of feedings to meet the needs. And if you're feeding a bottle and they're having huge exorcist style spit ups after a lot of feedings, then it might just be a volume issue that you're feeding too much and need to back down and do smaller, more frequent feeds. In terms of the speed of the nipple, I think that usually between 2 and 4 months, most babies will go from whatever like low flow 1, whatever the nomenclature is around the specific bottle type, to medium, and then to a fast, usually between 6 and 9 months. Some babies never do that. And I think, again, you just look at the baby and say, well, it used to take 15 minutes to do this bottle feeding, and now it's taking 35, and they're nodding off because they're so bored because it's taking so long. Well, it's probably just the time to go up on the speed of the nipple flow so that you can do things in a more, streamlined fashion, and it doesn't take an hour to feed a baby 4 or 5 ounces. So, and I agree completely with you on the nipple confusion thing. A lot of parents feel or are told you can't do a pacifier for 2 months or something like that, and then they come to me and they're like, well, what are we supposed to do? They cry all the time. We put him to breast. We never get any rest. He's latching well. He's feeding well. We have a good supply. He's growing well. What can we do? I think a pacifier is fine. Once we've established that latch is good, then a pacifier is totally fine. There's some evidence that shows that pacifiers actually help prevent SIDS. And so introducing a pacifier in my book is totally fine once we've got a good latch established. And basically that's the only criteria that I have too. And then, if it's the middle of the night and you can't get baby to calm down and mom needs a little bit rest, other parent can definitely go in, hold the baby, make sure the baby is fed and dry and all those things, and then stick pinky finger in and let the baby suck on the pinky finger, soothe, fall asleep, put the baby down. I think that's a totally appropriate thing once we're growing and thriving and all of those things too. So those are the common questions that I get around that specific topic.
It sounds like your answer in general can apply pretty much to anything, which is we can follow our baby's leads. We can trust our babies to
Yes.
let us know if an adjustment needs to be made. And we can trust ourselves. That's a big message in the bottom line for baby too. Follow your instincts, and you know your baby better than anybody else. So it's okay to follow their lead and follow our own instincts too.
Yes, I think if you look at your baby and instead of saying, the rule book says we have to do this much, but baby is telling me something different, look at the baby and say, well, I think the baby is telling us that he needs to eat more or that he's satisfied and we can use a pacifier. Like you can put those together comfortably and feel confident about your decision and move forward from that. All right. Best recommendation for avoiding picky eaters. I have a 2.5-year-old and bribe him through every meal, it seems. What do you say, or how do you help parents that are in the midst of this? This is a little bit older than the bottom line for baby, but I think it is all in the same playbook of how do we help our child when they're having difficulty with being a picky eater per se.
Yeah, and I can speak to this from my own experience, but also just from some collaborations I've had with other people who are specialized in this area, including some occupational therapists who work for me at the Center for Connection. Picky eating is totally developmentally appropriate. We have to remember that that as we get older, our taste buds become fewer or not as sensitive. So when babies have I don't even know how many, tens of thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of taste buds. So every bite is like alive, just an explosion of flavor in their mouth. Textures, all of these things have a big impact on their sensory processing, and they definitely have preferences. So a lot of babies are picky eaters. We have to know this also, that in fact, I'm a huge fan of Catherine McCord, who has her website and Instagram account is Weelicious. I highly recommend it. She does beautiful posts and really creative around her recipes and presentation for kids. Her kids grab handfuls of kale and just eat them. So I'm like, whatever you're doing, it's working.
That must be working, right?
She reminds us that, the first time you introduce a food, they might be like, ew, they don't like it at all. The second time they're like, ugh. Then the third time they're like, eh. The fourth time they're like, The fifth time they're like, yum, and we need to remember that we need to keep introducing foods. Don't make it a battle. So when we're bribing, when we're controlling and saying you have to eat that green bean or you can't get down, when we make it an issue, kids will be the winners every single time, unless you're willing to force food into your child's mouth, which please do not do. That's not helpful at all. We cannot control making someone fall asleep, eat, or go to the bathroom. So your child will ultimately be the winner here. So you don't want to make it a control battle. I also want to say that these early years are where our child's brain is wiring what the associations are around eating. And eating should be pleasurable. It should be relational. And most young kids, 4 and under, have a hard time sitting for long periods of time at the table. I wouldn't force that either. As they get older, they can spend longer times at the table. But if we make it into a big deal that has if your child's having a lot of negative experiences, they're going to come to associate eating with unpleasantness. So then it becomes even trickier. So just keep introducing things. Don't make it a big deal. Don't make it like you care a lot, because the more you make it like you care a lot, the more control issues they're going to have. Keep introducing things. Check out Weelicious. But then I will say, if your child, and I don't have the exact specifics on it, but I have kind of a rule of thumb in my head, by the time your kid is 4, if they will eat less than 10 food items, that's a time to get in touch with an occupational therapist that specializes in feeding and swallowing, because what they can do is they can provide other sensory inputs, like a weighted blanket on the child's lap or listening to a particular kind of music. So they can provide other sensory inputs that are pleasurable or positive for your child while they're introducing them to other foods. And then what do is they kind of really help expand their palates, because typically when kids are less than 10 foods by the time they're 4 or 5, that lets you know that there may be some sensory processing challenges or some dysregulation related to textures and those kinds of things. And it can be really helpful. I know many kids who, even at 10 and 12, would not go on sleepovers, won't go over to people's houses, won't go to camp, those kinds of things, because they're such picky eaters that just thinking about having to eat something other than their small handful of foods is really frightening and upsetting for them. That's the main thing we want to avoid, is for kids to have limited opportunities because they have such a restricted palate. So keep working at it. 2.5-year-olds are known for like being carb monsters. They love like the mac and cheese and the quesadillas and the, all of that. And that's perfectly fine. You just continue to do that. Have them, Catherine McCord would also say, let them be really heavily involved in picking the foods. What vegetable are we going to try this week? And I know it's hard right now with COVID. You're not really probably taking your kids to the store as much,
sure.
But looking at recipes together, growing, if you can, grow some things in pots or things in your yard where they're excited about, that tomato that comes on the vine, and then they can try it. So just, being, having them involved in it can be really helpful as well. What do you think about this, Phil?
I think everything that you said there is right on track. I like working backwards what you said. If by that age of 4 to 5 they really have a restricted diet, then definitely getting extra help and not just assuming they're just a picky eater. They're going to eat chicken nuggets until they get married and their spouse makes them, expand their palate or something like that. Like, there are things that you can do to help at that age. At 2.5, totally developmentally appropriate to be a picky eater and to push too. Like, I know that if I throw my lasagna on the ground, my mom or dad is going to make me chicken nuggets. Well, guess what? I'm just going to throw my lasagna or whatever I don't want to eat on the ground, because then I get chicken nuggets. And if we know that they're developing well and they're nourished, then we can say, oh, it doesn't look like you're hungry right now. Let's just cover your food up. And I try and just keep it on the exact same plate. So if they had a blue plate or a green plate at dinner, just put it on the same plate, put it in the refrigerator. And then when they come back to you and tell you, oh, I'm hungry, then same exact plate. You can warm it up and then give them, oh, look, it's the green plate again. We're having the same exact food. And then they learn, okay, well, if I'm hungry, then I kind of at least need to try the lasagna before I'm going to get something radically different that I want. Another thing that I hear quite frequently is that they're great eaters at daycare and they are terrible eaters at the dinner table. And I just reassure parents that, one, that's totally normal. Two, they have the social pressure at daycare. Wow, Timmy and Susie are definitely eating their green beans. Well, I'll eat my green beans too. Right. Whereas at home, they don't have that same, they don't have their friends to see that they're doing the same thing, and it's cool to eat green beans. And then a lot of kids just aren't hungry at dinner time necessarily. Yeah. So like you said, you can't force them to eat. And if it's adding to the stress, if it's adding to the frustration, if you're dreading mealtime every night, then we just need to take a pause and we need to say, okay, well, it looks like you're not hungry. I'm going to put your food away. Why don't you go play, or you can sit here while we eat and color if you want. And then if you're hungry, you just tell me I'm hungry and we'll get you your food out, and take all of the stress and all of the gain out of it, and see that, oh, eating is just another thing we do. It's more important that we enjoy it from a palate and texture and all of those things, and that we enjoy it as a way to connect as a family rather than the stress that a lot of people put into it. Because I expect my kid to sit at the table and wait for everyone else and say please and thank you and eat their green beans and wait after they're done until everybody is done and carry their dishes over. It's just a lot of expectations to have, and you're just going to find yourself constantly feeling like they're not meeting your expectations if that's the case. So
yeah, I think the other thing to keep in mind too is that having things be predictable and the same actually is really calming and feels good to us. Just like your kid wants the same book, or they want the same lovey or the same blanket. That kind of predictability, and identify with this. People kind of have their signature lunch right now that we're all home a lot more because of COVID. The New York Times had an article about a little girl who had 57 quesadillas for lunch since the pandemic started. This was like in April or something, like it had been almost every day. And I'm like, let her have the quesadillas, I'm a go-to. I love peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So I'll make Same. That as my thing. And there's nothing wrong with that, really. It, especially right now when the world is kind of unpredictable, having those same meals is maybe a way for your child that's kind of trying to comfort themselves. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And another reason why when they're at home, they like to kind of have their routines and rituals, but they might eat more at daycare. So one other really helpful kind of hack is there's this great, you can make it up yourself, but I just bought this on Amazon. I've given it as a gift a lot. There's a thing called dinner games, and it's a little tin and it's full of little cards you can pull out. And they have a young child version that's like from like 2 to 7. And then they have an older kid version. My kids they would be like, is it time for dinner yet? Because they were so excited to play dinner games, and it's just silly
that's so
stuff.
fun.
Like one person, everybody closes their eyes except one person who has to like pick something off the table and hide it, and everyone has to guess what's missing from the table. Or going around in alphabetical order, naming an animal that starts with whatever letters coming to you, stuff like that. And as you're playing those kinds of games, your child is feeling delight, and it's a shared moment of joy. And when our kids are connected to us in that way, their window of tolerance is actually typically wider. So that would be a great time as you're having fun to be like, okay, it's your turn. Take a bite of your green beans before you give an answer. They might not even think about it. So having fun happening during the dinner can also be a way to get our kids to have a little bit more tolerance around trying new things or eating things that they typically wouldn't.
Love it. That's such good advice, and I'll have to check that out. That would be a great thing to add to our dinner table, which can be chaotic, but most of the time is a chance to connect and, have good, conversation and talk about our day, rather than focusing on eat that, or don't eat that, or you're not getting a treat, or you're going to your room. I mean, it's just, there's so many opportunities for stress that you can just take away if you change your expectations and your mindset around eating.
Yeah.
I
used to always think about how, like, if my husband was talking to me that way, like you just did during dinner, I would never want to have dinner with him. That would be just not fun. And so we just really want to make it pleasant. Another quick tip, I know we need to wrap up. Get those. You can buy them in bulk, like 500 of them for less than $10. Those white paper placemats that they use at restaurants. And put them on the table and have your kid make placemats. Or if you need something for them to do while you're getting dinner ready, have them decorate placemats for everyone at the table. So that's another just really good go-to that you can just pull out. It's another good hack.
That's a great idea. And it just adds something fun, something that we can talk about. Wow, look at this placemat that so-and-so made. Isn't that so neat? Let's see if we can put our plate right in the middle of it. All of those just opportunities to have our self-esteem and our confidence boosted as we sit at the table, and then associate that, like you said, with a wider window of tolerance for trying Brussels sprouts or whatever it might be.
And I was the kind of kid that loved lists and checking things off. No surprise for how I am now. So if my parent had said, draw on your placemat or make a list of all the foods we're eating tonight, and as you eat them, you can cross it off, I would have been eating everything to cross my list off. So that would be another thing you could try, depending on if you have a more type A kind of kid.
That is a great idea. Okay, that's one that I'm going to take home and implement at our house. Well,
let me know how it goes.
It's been so fun to talk through these questions, and we'll definitely do this again. And I would encourage everybody, I know that you've already had a lot of people get this book, and I love it, and I give it out to parents. I actually have a box right back here on the floor of The Bottom Line for Baby, because it just answers all the questions that parents have in the first year of life. And if you have a question, drop it in the comments below. Even if you're watching it in replay, you can drop a comment below with a question that we can cover in our next session, or text me. It's 402-256-0768. Thank you so much for being a part of this and for answering these questions and being such a great resource for parents, especially in this difficult time.
So fun always to connect with you.
Perfect.
All right. I know you're late for your meeting. Sorry, we went a little bit.